Okay, I'm going to be picking up, reviewing some of the groups of birds on the AOS checklist of North and Middle American birds, focusing specifically on birds found in the Pacific Northwest. And so we left off at family Trochilidae, order Apodiformes. And so now we are looking at order Gruiformes. And whether or not you see any representatives of Gruiformes is very much hit or miss. You might get into the right environment and look for and actually observe a rail, or if you are able to get to a place where there is sandhill crane migration, this is the time right now to be looking for them, you might be able to see a sandhill crane. And so there are some rails that you might be able to see, and then depending on where you go, there's a possibility of sometimes seeing sandhill crane. Charadriiformes is the next order. Charadriiformes is a very large order of birds that tend to be found in coastal environments and wet environments. This includes our shorebirds, our gulls, and some other interesting groups of birds. And so this is a really pretty interesting order of birds. Lots of different families within this order. And I'm just going to focus again on ones found in the Pacific Northwest. There is family Charadriidae, and these are your birds like killdeer and other birds that are called plovers. And these are sandpiper-like birds with relatively kind of large heads, large eyes, and short bills. Scolopacidae. This includes our sandpipers, and there are lots of species of sandpipers, and we're coming upon a time where shorebird migration is going to be really ramping up. And so if you can manage to get to the coast or even around the Puget Sound, if you can get to mudflats and areas like that, you may see movements of large and small shorebirds. And we have many, many different groups of shorebirds, from the little least and western sandpipers all the way up to long-billed dowitchers and long-billed curlews, and other cool species. And so if you're interested in shorebirds, this is a great time to be looking out for them. Unless you get to the really far off areas, you're unlikely to see Jaegers. But Alcidae. So family Alcidae is also within the Charadriiformes, and these are our puffins, our guillemots, and our auks and auklets. And so you can see those on the water, particularly pigeon guillemots are ramping up for breeding season. There are some actual beaches around the Puget Sound area that have bluffs with nesting colonies of pigeon guillemots. You might also see some other types of birds depending on what kind of water areas that you're able to get out and observe. Laridae are our gulls. And so during the breeding season, our most common gulls are ring-billed gull and western and glaucous wing gulls and hybrids of those. And so, but there are a number of species that you might see. And we also can get terns at this time of year, particularly Caspian tern can be found. So listening for a bird that sounds almost kind of like a great blue heron, but a shorter, kind of more emphatic sound, and looking up is a good idea, because to me, that's sort of what a Caspian tern sounds like. They have a very knife-like bill and rapid flight and long wings. So those are Charadriiformes. Next group we would be looking at would be Gvea Forms, which are our loons, and family Gveaidae. We could get several species. Most common right now would be common loon, and loons are moving from a more marine period to a more freshwater period this time of year, and they're also, many have gone through molt and are going through molt and changing their feathers, so it's an interesting time to be looking at them. Unless you get into the pelagic area, far off the ocean waters, you're unlikely to see Procellariiform birds. And I'm not going to really talk about them in detail, because that's not something that's happening. People aren't getting on boats a whole lot at this moment to do things like water bird tours. All right. So I'm going to scroll on down to Suliformes. And this is going to be a stopping point. Actually, I might go one more past, because includes some similar birds. Suliformes, we have one group, Phalcocoracidae, that you might find representatives from in the water areas, and these are our cormorants. And in the Puget Trough, you can find 3 species of cormorant fairly commonly. Our most common is double-crested, but you can also observe pelagic cormorant as well as Brandt's cormorant. And so understanding the differences in their features is really important. Cormorants all have a gular, a small throat pouch. They used to be thought most closely related to pelicans, which is our next order of birds, but they're actually more closely related to things like frigate birds and boobies. And so to look at your field guide to really look at the differences between those 3 species. Pelagics are sort of the most delicate looking ones. They tend to be they're the smallest. If you can see them in flight or you see them with their wings outstretched, you will sometimes see little white patches on their sides. They have very narrow, thin, sort of delicate looking bills. And then looking during this breeding season, if you see them during the breeding season and they're in breeding stage, you can look for differences in some of the markings around the face and the eye to determine the difference of some of these different species. And then finally, Pelecaniformes. Pelecaniformes is an interesting group. At the level of order, it's a group that's kind of changed the representatives within it a fair amount. Within the families of these birds, there's been very little shifting and changing around those. So that's something interesting to know about them. But in Pelecaniformes, family Ardeidae has some representatives that you can find in Washington, particularly the great blue heron. But this time of year, you can actually also get the green heron. And so that's an interesting one to look at for on some of the waters around here. And we're going to drop off from there and continue on in another video.